Now I go alone, my disciples, you too, go now alone. Thus I want it. Go away from me, and resist Zarathustra. And even better, be ashamed of him. Perhaps he has deceived you. You revere me, but what if your reverence tumbles one day? Beware lest a statue slay you. Now, one of the things that's obvious to me in the modern intellectual circles on the study of Nietzsche is the emphasis placed on his spiritual philosophy of Dionysianism, or the art of laughter, as it's referred to by him. The art of self-liberation and giving birth to a dancing star, to use his phrase. Dionysian spirituality is one of, if not the main central tenet to Nietzsche's philosophy that so many are attracted to and inspired by, and they should be inspired by it. It's robust, it's meaningful, it's spiritually uplifting, it's liberating, and it has ancient connotations to a form of being that is natural. It's free and fulfilling, giving oneself over to the divine of mirth and the rejection of moral hindrances, giving oneself over to their drives of power and creativity and joy. But there is a little problem with this that isn't given much attention, and that pertains to exactly what Nietzsche wanted, which was for us to surpass him, as he himself was the ideal that he set up for us to be surmounted. Friedrich Schelling once said, quote, "All rules for study can be summed up in this: learn in order to create." And this ties into the subject of the purpose of learning from Nietzsche, or anybody for that matter, for the purposes of advancing and empowering ourselves. Nietzsche's philosophy, after all, revolves around how to create new values, new beliefs and ethical systems, new objectives and new ideals. And in this age of nihilistic decadence, many have a tendency to become entranced by Nietzsche's ideas of the nature of heroic greatness in man through self-willing and self-creating. It becomes an inspiring, soothing balm to the soreness that we're afflicted with in such a time of mindless indolence and hedonism, the time of the last man, where there are no creators, no geniuses, no warriors anymore. So many find themselves clinging to the welcoming, life-affirming insights of Nietzsche's teachings of what it means to make light in darkness and to cast off our ideological dependencies and attachments. And Nietzsche, as I will seek to illuminate here, is himself also one of these attachments that we should seek to divorce ourselves from. Now, in his famous epic, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which I believe is his most honest work and where you'll find the deepest insights into the compendium of his whole philosophy, there are two particular chapters toward the end of the work that stand out to me. In part 4, I'll be using these as examples. The first one is titled The Shadow. And in this chapter, we find the great chaos sower himself, Zarathustra, coming toward the end of his wandering travels. And having met a number of notable individuals along his path, he comes across a special one who manifests himself as Zarathustra's shadow. It's a man who's in great distress. He accosts Zarathustra and throws himself at his feet, prostrate before him. He begins to lament about how lost he is after having accepted the great chaos sower's challenge to overturn all his values and beliefs, to become at last free in himself, but only to now be thrust into a void of rootlessness and spiritual impoverishment. He pleads with Zarathustra this way: "With you I have haunted the remotest, coldest worlds like a ghost that runs voluntarily over winter rooftops and snow. With you I strive to enter everything forbidden, worst, remotest, and if anything of mine is a virtue, then it is that I have feared no ban. With you I smashed anything my heart honored. I overthrew all boundary stones and images. I pursued the most dangerous wishes. Indeed, I have passed over every crime at least once. With you I unlearned my faith in words and values and great names. When the devil sheds his skin, does his name not fall off too? For it too is skin. Perhaps the devil himself is skin. Nothing is true, all is permitted. Thus I persuaded myself. I plunged into the coldest waters with head and heart. Oh, how often I paid for it by standing there naked as a red crab. Oh, where has all my goodness and all my shame and all my faith in the good gone? Oh, where has that mendacious innocence that I once possessed gone? The innocence of the good and their noble lies. Too often, to be sure, I followed on the heels of truth, and it kicked me in the head. Sometimes I believed I was lying, and behold, that's where I first hit the truth. Too much became clear to me. Now it doesn't matter to me anymore. Nothing that I love lives anymore. How am I supposed to still love myself? Live as I please, or don't live at all. That's how I want it. And that's how the saintliest person wants it too. But, alas, how could I still have pleasure? Do I still have a goal, a harbor toward which my sail turns, a good wind? Indeed, only the one who knows where he's sailing knows also which wind is good and which is his favorable wind. What did I have left? A heart weary and insolent, a restless will, fluttering wings, a broken backbone? Ever a visitor, searching for my home. Oh, Zarathustra, you well know. This visiting was my visitation, and it consumes me. Where is my home? I asked, and I searched for it, but I have not found it. O eternal everywhere, O eternal nowhere, O eternal in vain. But the great chaos sower, he offers this man no guidance, no comfort, no succor to his spiritual distress. Instead, he only has this to respond to him. To such restless ones as you, even a jail ends up looking like bliss. Have you ever seen how captured criminals sleep? They sleep peacefully. They enjoy their new captivity. Beware that you are not captured in the end by a narrow belief, a harsh, severe delusion, because now you are seduced and tempted by anything that is narrow and solid. You have lost your goal, indeed. How will you get rid of and get over this loss? Along with it, you have also lost your way. You poor roamer and raver, you weary butterfly. Do you want to have a rest and a home this evening? Then go up to my cave. There leads the path to my cave. And now I have to run away from you, quickly again. Already, it's as though I'm covered in shadow. I want to run alone, so that things clear up around me again. For that, I'll yet have to be long on my legs and like it. So we see in this exchange the hardship of Zarathustra's path that he offers to those who desire a goal in their newfound freedom. The man is distressed because his freedom is not free, because his God has been killed, and so his identity along with it. His rebirth into the unknown is traumatizing to him, as he despairs his lack of direction, his aimlessness, his inability to cope with the ideological chaos he has been thrust into. because his freedom lacks an objective, an ideal to strive for, and a reason to understand itself. So he invests himself and his power into the ideal of Zarathustra. But Zarathustra is irrational, the Dionysian madman, offering only power and leaving one to fend for themselves. Zarathustra forces him to evolve or perish. He shows the man that he doesn't even desire to listen to him, but leave him to his own devices. He clearly shows the man that he offers him no guidance to his plight. And so, this is akin to a scene in the movie Interview with the Vampire, if you've ever seen it, and I think most people have. The relationship between the vampire Lestat and his companion Louis, where he turns Louis into a vampire, and then Louis is tormented with the need to understand his new state as a vampire and why he has urges of bloodlust. He still struggles with his humanity, his moral qualms and preoccupations. And he pleads with Lestat to help him understand himself and to teach him. But Lestat has nothing to teach him, no guidance to give him, no consolation. He simply tells Louis to have the courage to embrace himself as a vampire and to give himself over to his nature and do what he should do as a vampire. To succumb to a form of pure being of himself, to not take pity on humans or feel mercy, and to overcome these human moral frailties that make him sick and pervert his nature as a vampire. And in the movie, it takes Louis a long time to accept himself as he is, because he wants reasons and an understanding of himself, but he never actually achieves it. He only learns bits and pieces here and there throughout his existence, but he never gets anything close to the whole idea of his vampiric nature and identity. And eventually he succumbs to what he is and just moves on. And so we see this parallel in the Shadow Man, with the need for freedom to be directed to a goal or to self-actualization of itself. And if it doesn't, then it begins to turn inward and implode and potentially destroy itself. And this brings me to the subsequent chapter that it immediately follows the Shadow, which is called At Noon. And it's a very short, underrated, and overlooked little chapter. And it doesn't delve into any of Nietzsche's main philosophical principles. But it captures, I think, something very valuable and meaningful about his psychology and spirituality. And in this chapter, after Zarathustra leaves the grieving man behind, he finally finds a moment of solitude and respite, which is something he claims to love. And he sits under a tree to rest. And it's a peaceful afternoon. And he begins to bask in the warmth of the sun and the tranquility of nature. And all seems perfectly right with the world. But then something happens. Something's not quite right. He begins to stir, and he becomes restless, and he soon realizes that he can't sit still, that his peaceful solitude is perhaps something of an unwanted nuisance that he must reject, something of a negative disturbance. And he speaks this way: like a ship that sailed into its stillest bay, now it leans against the earth, weary of the long journeys and the uncertain seas. Is the earth not more faithful? How such a ship moors and nestles itself to the land. Now it's enough for a spider to spin a web to it from the land. It needs no stronger lines now. Like such a weary ship in the stillest bay, thus I too rest now, close to the earth, faithfully trusting, waiting, bound to it with the lightest threads. O happiness, O happiness, do you want to sing, O my soul? You lie in the grass, but this is the secret solemn hour when no shepherd plays his flute. Stand back. Hot noon sleeps on the meadows. Do not sing. Still, the world is perfect. Do not sing, you winged bug in the grasp. O my soul, do not even whisper. Look here, be still. Old Noon is sleeping. He's moving his mouth. Didn't he just drink a drop of happiness? An old brown drop of golden happiness, golden wine? It flits over him. His happiness is laughing. Thus laughs a god. Be still. Get up. You little thief, you loafing thief. What? Still stretching, yawning, sighing, falling down into deep wells. Who are you, O my soul? O sky above me. You're looking at me? You're listening to my strange soul? When will you drink this drop of dew that has fallen upon all earthly things? When will you drink this strange soul? When, well of eternity? You cheerful, dreadful noon abyss, when will you drink my soul back into yourself? So, this captures a significant aspect of Nietzsche's psycho-spiritual mentality. That he's bursting with this inner power, right, this creative drive and energy in himself. And it's so turbulent that it cannot stand to take pleasure in something as simple as being in a restful state of bliss and communing with existence. Because this is a kind of state where one has to be idle, where one is non-productive, a state of leisure. And we can see in these passages that Nietzsche is expressing an actual subconscious contempt for being in such a state, despite venerating the beauty of it. So he's struggling with his own paradoxical nature. He longs instead to remain active, to be productive, to strive and push onward, even if he has no ultimate goal or final destination, having accepted the eternal recurrence. If anything, this restless need to disperse his reservoirs of power and energy that's churning within him and quite literally driving him mad is the Dionysian madness he suffers from. And it is this madness that drives him onward. Because it's important to understand that Nietzsche was in fact something of a paradox, that he adored things like solitude and saw the immense reward in them. But deep down, he didn't desire to actually be in that state. He wanted constant challenges and stimulation and to be active and to conquer. And this relates to how much he traveled in his own lifetime. This is why he comes to reject the higher men, right? The ones who became his disciples and made their way back to his cave and sojourned and waited for him to praise him and fawn over him. And even though they had superior qualities, they were still tainted with slavishness, self-annulling melancholia, and herd morality. They couldn't cast off their trifles. They couldn't keep up with Zarathustra. He wanted to transcend his whole humanity and become godlike. He wanted, in a sense, to leave his whole human condition behind and reach a type of Buddhist nirvana, not of ego death, but of ego affirmation, of power and greatness. So when the chaos sower sees us in need of direction of our power, and he offers us solace by directing us to his cave, we should understand that his cave is the last place we should go. Nor should we fall at his feet and plead for guidance. Nor should we become his followers or his disciples. We should instead create our own paths lead ourselves, teach ourselves, set ourselves as our own standard and our own ideal. This is what Nietzsche wanted from us. This is what it means to be a creator in the face of eternity, of the abyss. And thus, what we take from Nietzsche is the rejection of nihilism. In the section of the book called The Magician, he encounters the man who attempts to seduce Zarathustra with the melancholy of meaninglessness of existence, with clever poetics and obscure language. And Zarathustra rebukes him, telling him that he sees through his farce and that he will not allow himself to be taken in by the resentment of nihilistic sentiment. And so we learn from the Dionysian the value of creation, not of his values, but of our own, precisely as he would have wanted. To create means to have a goal, something to invest our power into, an identity to keep us balanced as we walk the fine line between life and death. If Nietzsche was alive today and he saw people going around calling themselves Nietzschean, he would die of laughter. He would laugh at them because that would have been the last thing he wanted us to become, his acolytes. The idol breaker would never have wanted to be idolized. So, let us have our little palaver in front of the fire with the great wise man. Let us listen intently to his teachings and absorb his knowledge. Let's learn from him. And then let's thank him and bid him farewell, leaving him to his own devices, to his own fate, as he leaves us happily to ours, and walk our own path of power.